I'm here to tell you that Breath of the Wild sucks. And so does Super Mario Galaxy 2, Red Dead Redemption 2, Grand Theft Auto 5, Super Mario Odyssey, Mass Effect 2, Skyrim, The Last of Us Remastered, Red Dead Redemption, Portal 2, God of War. Okay, now that I've successfully pissed off everyone watching this, I'm free to say whatever I want, as I don't think I can make things worse for myself. So back to Breath of the Wild. When it came out, I purposefully stayed away from any and all forms of spoilers for years, which was a challenge harder than Millennia at level 1. Ah fuck.
Your sense of self will be destroyed by quantum mechanics, you stupid fuck.
And just so we're clear, you clicked on this video that released in 2023, there's gonna be some spoilers. And just like PC performance in AAA games this year, it wasn't clean. I certainly took some damage. Like on the day it came out, every goddamn website had an article about how you can try to beat the game immediately after leaving the tutorial area. That shit was unavoidable, but for the most part I actually managed to have a fairly clean experience of Breath of the Wild 6 years after its release. So, does it suck? Drumroll please? No, it doesn't. Big shocker, I know. The widely proclaimed game of the decade isn't a bad game. So why am I talking about this game 6 years after its release? Well, for one, as said, I recently completed it. Also, it's a game with just slightly more than average influence over the gaming industry. And lastly, there's a secret I want to share with you. Recently there was a trailer released for a game called Tears of the Kingdom. And you might have missed it because it's hard to spot. However, pay close attention now. Spotted it? Let's rewind. That's a tree. Breath of the Wild also had trees. So that means Tears of the Kingdom is a sequel to Breath of the Wild.
You've lost your mind. You've lost your goddamn mind, Charlie!
So now that we start things off properly, let's set one thing straight from the get-go. It's a very good game. The overall world design is gorgeous and varied, from a volcano to a giant castle and a desert. The world overall is memorable. The freedom you have on a scale from North Korea to a cat is not even on the chart, as I don't think a cat could climb a 100-meter high overhang. That is undoubtedly the most characteristic and arguably best part of the game. Your runes, which allow you to do anything from moving a metal plate to whatever the hell that is, make the game feel even more open in another different way. That part of the game design is brilliant and worthy of every bit of praise it gets. Then there's some things where the game is just fine, serviceable. The story for starters isn't bad, but feels like an afterthought for most of it. When I played it, I just ran around in the world and occasionally, randomly, just stumbled upon a divine beast. And doing the quest for each took less than half an hour, which in such a huge world is an insignificant part of it. But you know what? That's perfectly fine. It could have been better, but I wouldn't have wanted more of it, as that would distract from what I actually really enjoyed in the game. Another thing is the combat system. When I say that, I am removing the runes from the equation. Obviously they play into that, but the game clearly also wants you to fight without the runes, at least partially. And there it shows that it's serviceable. Again, it could be better. While I basically used every part of the combat system, which is a good sign, oftentimes I found myself using just one or two aspects of it per enemy. Lionels quickly devolved into jumping and flurry rushing, which became repetitive quickly. Flurry rushing also feels quite inconsistent as to when you trigger it, and I would have preferred it without or less of a slowdown, as it kind of kills the pace of a fight in my opinion. But all in all, especially with the runes, it's still quite decent. When it comes to the weapon durability system, I think it's a cool idea and all, but after the first couple hours I never felt like I needed to preserve my weapons. I constantly left behind good weapons because my inventory was full and it never even reached half empty. And once you get the Master Sword, it's just a complete non-issue. From my perspective, it wasn't punishing enough, which is just totally stereotypical coming from a Souls player, I know. But I think their experiences differ a lot depending on playstyle, and I don't think by itself it's really a negative. However, put a pin on this because we'll come back to this later. So all this sounds like a pretty decent start. Some things where the game is top of the line, and some where it fulfills its job. Some corners have to be cut after all. However, since the game got so much praise that everyone forgot Horizon Zero Dawn was a thing that exists, a fate remarkably shared by its successor, My experiences for Breath of the Wild were just a tad higher than they were for Ubisoft's Tom Clancy's Assassin's Creed Far Cry from a good game. So while it is a very good game, there are parts where I felt it fell short. So now I'm gonna tell you why Breath of the Wild sucks. What is this script? Who wrote this? What the fuck? An element in a game, whether it's a quest, a dungeon, or beetle, can be broken down into 4 pieces, like a burger, that ideally work together to create a fulfilling portion of a game. First, you need to create the desire to go there, to do the thing. This can be done in a variety of ways. In some MMOs, for example, the game tells you outright before the quest begins what you are gonna get. That of course ruins some of the surprise and wonder, but it can work for that type of game. Next, you gotta get to that thing. This part is especially important in open world games. Within that section you can have many smaller instances of these 4 steps, when you find things on the way that you just wanna check out. Third, there's doing the actual thing, whether it's fighting something, doing a puzzle, or avoiding 50,000 buzzsaws. This is the actual core gameplay. And in some cases, if this is good enough, this can be the draw to the event in the first place. Finally, there's the reward. This can come in many different forms. Some games don't need a direct in-game reward, as just beating the challenge can be the reward itself. That won't work for all players, and you always run the risk, especially if the gameplay isn't completely on point, that it will not have the desired effect. The reward can even be in the form of dialogue. In The Witcher 3, for example, doing quests didn't feel rewarding because of the money you got, but because of the story you got to experience. So let's look at some examples of the open world content for Breath of the Wild. Let's take the first landmark I set my eye on that I actually went to, the Dueling Peaks. I didn't directly go there. In fact, by the time I got there I already did like 12 shrines, but it was my first proper goal in the game. It completely passes the first part. It's a mountain split in half. Yeah, I wanna go there. I don't need a mark or some promise of unlimited drugs and hookers. I'll go there even without any guarantees. That marks the first step as a success, and the second one is just as much of a home run. I mean, for one, you're climbing a huge fucking mountain. That feels pretty badass, even if you're just holding one button. Also, as mentioned before, on the way there I did a bunch of other things, so it's not like the way there was boring and just a straight line. Nah, it was basically a sine wave everywhere around the place. So next is what you actually get to do there. So when you climb up the mountain you find 2 shrines, puzzle shrines. Puzzles which are basically directly written out what you need to do. Now the shrines in Breath of the Wild are mostly fine. I don't want to talk them down too much because in essence I do like them, discounting the tests of strength, which are very repetitive. I do hate that they all look the same. I mean, they're all floating around in a big hall with the same textures. They really could have done way more with that. For the most part, they are unique puzzles, and while none of them are challenging, that's fine. They don't need to be. Using the powers in Breath of the Wild is fun, and you can often solve shrines in a multitude of ways. So that sounds fine in essence, right? But it's not when you consider that for one, they are fucking everywhere. There's 120 of them. They are not rare. So finding one isn't particularly exciting, and almost none of them are memorable. Again, that wouldn't be a huge issue, however it is an issue when they are the main kind of content you'll find. Because let's look at what else you can find. There's some side quests you can do in Breath of the Wild, however most boil down to simple fetch quests or the like, with really nothing additional to them. A guy asked me to bring 500 rupees to a ferry, so I did that, came back, and that was it. There wasn't really any additional dialogue, there was a bit of a joke, but that's the extent of it. That quest mainly existed to guide you to the ferry and give you some extra cash for it. The first article on Google for best side quests Breath of the Wild gives you a top 10, which lists a fetch quest with some riddles and another basic fetch quest as some of the best ones. Now I am being a bit unfair here, as there are some good ones even amongst the ones I ended up completing. For example, the Korok trials were quite neat, and when we move away from the side quests, I loved the Eventide Island shrine quests. Point being, while in total they are again serviceable, just like shrines, they're not good enough to be the main form of content to find. They're not memorable. Aside from that, you can also find monster camps everywhere, which are mostly laid out the same. And this is where we get into subpar territory, because they're all the same, both in layout and the monsters you fight. In fact, the enemy variety in Breath of the Wild is, in my humble opinion, abysmally bad. Taking out reskins that mostly just differ in stats, for such a huge game, it feels like there's less enemy variety here than in the original Super Mario Bros. This is helped out a bit by them using different weapons, but that is limited since most weapons can be put into one of 3 categories, and aside from elemental and stats, they are basically all the same within them, with a couple of exceptions. And this is where the weapon durability system balancing comes back to bite the game in its buttocks, because the most fun way to fight things is with the runes. However, when you have nothing pushing you to use them because you're full of, for the moment, top class weaponry, you have to go out of your way to do it. Point being, the game doesn't push you enough in the direction of the most fun way to play the game. The 4th main form of content you can find is, well, one time I saw a big mountain and decided I wanted to get to the top. I didn't have enough cold resistant clothes and didn't want to bother cooking cold resistance meals, so I put a pin in it for a while. Days later I finally found my cold resistant clothes and was excited to finally get to climb it. From the start I put all my spirits orbs into stamina until I couldn't, so I had the freedom to basically climb anything, so that's what I did. And what do you find at the top? A Korok Seed. These things are the lowest form of content in Breath of the Wild, and while as an addition to a complete open world, they would be a positive thing, but as you can imagine, I don't think this is a complete open world, because those 4 things are the main things you can find in the world, none of which are exciting, none of which are memorable, none of which feel unique. That puts the Korok Seeds way too much in focus, and while it's cool that at least most of them are more than just an item on the ground, be it put the thing in the place or jump in the circle, they still leave me sighing every time. Lastly, the reward for these things. Shrines, a spirit orb, maybe a mineral or a weapon you already have, and rarely, if you're lucky, a piece of armor. For quests you get mostly money and basic items. I would have much preferred at least some character development or cool dialogue over another Amber. Monster camps, more weapons than you can carry, all of which you already have or had. Or maybe the game takes the piss on you and gives you 5 arrows for your troubles. Korok Seeds, well, you get a Korok Seed. And here's the thing, this whole thing isn't in isolation, it's a loop. After doing a bunch of monster camps, I started to just completely ignore them. If doing them isn't fun and rewarding, that also kills any desire to do things of that type from that point on, effectively removing that type of content from the game. The same thing started happening with quests. After most of them ended up feeling disappointing, I stopped doing most of them. Shrines I did until I could pick up the Master Sword, then I started ignoring them too. And because the cost for expanding the inventory goes up exponentially, Korok Seeds also start to become worthless after a bit. And yes, there's some other things you can find. There's some stables around the land, and there's a few settlements, and there's the Great Fairies and so on. But these 4 things make up more than 99% of what you'll find that isn't main quest related. So when you take these things out, what is left in the game? After a while of playing, I genuinely felt that the world was empty. But when thinking about it, it clearly isn't. In fact, it's pretty densely packed. And it took a while to realize why I felt that way. It's the lack of unique content, the lack of exciting content, the lack of memorable content. Most of what the world has feels like copy-pasted content. If the shrines at least looked unique inside of them, if there was some consequences or character development from side quests, if bandit camps rewarded unique weapons, this would not be an issue. At some point I just wanted to see every part of the world, which was still fun and exciting as there were some areas I actually barely touched, but that is completed relatively quickly, leaving me with nothing to do anymore, at which point I just decided to end the game. The point where I really became a bit frustrated with the game was the Lomei Labyrinth Island. When I got the map for the area and saw it, I was like... So I went there to check it out, looked at it just being there, totally out of place, so I was like... and decided to just try to go in there, not expecting that to work. And when it worked, I was like... I was quite hyped for it, expecting it to be something special, but it ended up being a mostly empty labyrinth with a couple of chests that had basic loot, very few enemies, and a shrine at the end. By far the most exciting part of the entire thing was the basement afterwards, and it was just so baffling. Why does this structure exist for you to put basically nothing in it? Why have it stand out so much in the land and then do nothing with it? All this sounds like I'm shitting on the game, but what I really want to say is that this game felt like a lot of wasted potential. It clearly could have been one of the greatest games of all time, and to a lot of people it is, To me it's just a very good game that is GOAT worthy in some aspects and below average in others. It almost feels unfinished, and that it can still be this good while feeling unfinished just speaks to how high the quality of the core game is, and it frustrates me to no end. The Breath of the Wild burger might have some amazing bread and some really good salad on it, but all I'm asking from Tears of the Kingdom is to make the sauce and the patty on the same level. And also, while we're on the topic, just give me an option to cook multiple things at once. Why isn't that in the game? What the fuck? There are some aspects I didn't touch on, both positive and negative. For example, Hyrule Castle is fucking awesome, and I really wish there was more in the game like that, while the fact that the focus button is not toggle is infuriating to me to no end. But originally I just wanted to talk about the open world, so I'm gonna leave it here. As I'm a patient gamer, I will be playing Tears of the Kingdom in 2034, so I can't wait for that. Thanks for watching, and always remember, God of War fucking sucks!